Smooth. Okay, doing a Bleach video. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are nearing the 1-year anniversary of the end of Bleach. Actually, today is July 18th. That's the 11th month anniversary today. The last chapter, 686, I think was released on the 18th of August of last year. So I just wanted to ask, you guys doing okay? You doing all right? I'm here for you. You want a hug? Okay, that's a little creepy, but I just want to make sure you're all right. Okay. Every so often, I've talked in length about all these different aspects of Bleach. I've talked about all the Espada, I've talked about all of the Gote, I've talked about all the Sternritters. I mean, I have a lot of that stuff under my belt already, but recently I think I've gotten to that point where it's like, it's been a while since I've read Bleach, and so, I buy all the recent volumes. I just picked up volume 70 the other day. I've been rereading a lot of the manga now, because some time has passed for me to reread it, because back when I was reviewing it, it was like I had all this shit on standby. I could recite to you shit that happened in the Soul Society arc. I could give you the exact chapter number, but some time has passed, and I'm like, alright, now I can start reading it for leisure again. I haven't checked this out in a while. So, checking it out, and every now and then I'll stumble across something that I'll be like, yeah, what was up with that? That was so weird that was never really elaborated upon. And usually when I get to that point, I'm like, I should make a video about that, and like, oh shit, I already did. But there was one instance that occurred to me rather recently when I was reading back through the Fullbringer Arc, that I got, an idea for a video, and I don't think I ever made this video before. I believe I've mentioned it before in, like, reviews and stuff, but I've never actually made a full video about it. Yeah. What was the deal with Ginjo? Yeah, this sexy guy right here with the necklace and the leather jacket. Where was this guy going? Was this supposed to be, like, a little bit more of an elaborate story that was supposed to be fleshed out? Because it really didn't go that way. Now, look, there was some stuff going against him right from the beginning, okay? So the arc he was introduced in was an arc that not a lot of people enjoyed. Partly because of him, but also partly because of that other guy, the guy with the suspenders that we don't talk about. But anyway, yeah, he had some bad luck there. Then you get into the final arc, and you got Quincy's and everything going around, so it's like, holy shit, he gets... maybe Kubo had a better plan for him there, because he did show up in the 1,000-Year Blood War arc rather early on, and you think, oh, wow, he's gonna do something. And then it's the same thing with a lot of other stuff. It's like, last few chapters, he just gets thrown in there to make, like, basically a cameo appearance. He really doesn't do anything. He shows up, and it's really Tsukishima being the one that actually helps out Ichigo. Ginjo just kind of shows up, gives Ichigo some words of encouragement, and then shoves him off to the Soul Society to fight against Yuha. That's pretty much all his accomplishments are there. Way to go, Ginjo. But there are still some questions that need to be answered about his character, alright? So for those of you that need just a little bit of recap, because it has been a while, Ginjo Kugo was the original substitute Shinigami. He was the one that basically set up a lot of the rules, or rather that the Shinigami had to create the rules for him. How did Ginjo Kugo become a Shinigami? We don't know! How did he lose his powers? We don't know. What crime did he commit that made him lose his powers? We don't know that either. However, the stuff we do know about him is that after losing his powers, he had a big grudge for the Soul Society. He really wanted to, bite it where they bit him, right in the ass, So, he came up with this master plan in order to get his powers back, utilizing Ichigo as bait. He would use him to, train up Fullbring, which is a power that all people have that had hollows attack their mothers when they were, in their infancy, which I guess would also imply that Ginjo himself, his mother, I guess, was attacked by a hollow. So this is one of the things that make Ginjo's story and Ichigo's story very, like a very prominent, parallel thing. Because apparently, Ginjo had hollow powers ever since he was a kid, and then became a substitute Shinigami. Ichigo, his mother was also attacked by a hollow, and so he had hollow powers, and then also became a substitute Shinigami. So, there's some more stuff going on there that we don't really go into. But anyway, he, because he's kind of a shitty actor, because he felt like he wouldn't be able to, play it off enough so that maybe he would give it away, that Ichigo would catch on, because Ichigo, he's pretty astute to these He's pretty astute to these sort of things. He's not a complete idiot. He would probably catch on if some shadowy figure just comes out of nowhere and apparently Ginjo was a shitty actor. So he had Tsukishima have this whole elaborate plan, you know, stabbing him with Book of the End, implanting fake memories into not only him, but all the other members of Execution to try to really lure Ichigo in to make them think that they were his allies, train Ichigo up, get him to Fullbringer status, and then Ginjo, you know, would have his memories restored by Tsukishima, and then he would steal Ichigo's powers, adding them on top to himself, and then he would get his powers back, and then, what would he do with them? I don't know. No, seriously, let me ask you this again. What was Ginjo's endgame here? Alright, I'm gonna steal the powers from Ichigo, alright? I'm gonna get my powers back, plus an extra bonus from Ichigo's power, like he can go into, like, you know, his Bonkai, he can go and fucking Getsuga Tensho and shit. I'm like, alright, then what? Then what, Ginjo? What were you planning on doing? Were you planning on... I mean, he did throw a line in there. He did state that he wanted Ichigo to become his ally. You know, at a moment there, telling Ichigo, after Ichigo got his powers back too, after Rukia stabs Ichigo and Ichigo gets his powers back, and Ichigo and Ginjo are fighting, Ginjo has this moment where he's trying to, like, bring Ichigo over to his side, where he's telling him, you know, you have to remember all that shit about the combat pass, Ichigo, you know? I just happen to have a combat pass in my drawer, as well as one on my door, because I am, you know, that's how that goes. But he's like, yeah, do you know what the combat pass really does, Ichigo? Do you know what really has, you know, it's gonna be, they use it to track you, and they use it to limit your powers, and they didn't tell you anything like this. And the whole, the kingpin behind this whole plan is the person you trusted so much was Jushiro Uketake, ooh. So they're the bad guys, Ichigo, you gotta come over to my side, you know? So, maybe Ginjo was planning on Ichigo joining up with them, and then they were gonna maybe fight against the Soul Society. That still seems like a stupid idea. Even if you got Ichigo on your team, plus you got the other Fullbringers to help you out, that's still like... That's like 8, maybe 9 people you got working with you here, Ginjo. Let's see, you got Ginjo, you got Tsukishima, you go Shishigawara, you got Ichigo, I assume. You know, Riruka, Giriko, Jackie, you know, like, Chad, maybe. I mean, he's being manipulated by Tsukishima. Maybe you want to throw Orihime in there. She's being manipulated too. Okay, you got like 9 guys, some girls to fight against the Shinigami, to fight against the Soul Society for what they did to Ginjo. So I don't really know what his plan was there. Other than that, was it just planning on, I'm gonna get my powers back so I can just, I don't know, just for the sake of, like, fuck you, Soul Society. I don't know. Maybe it was, like, just a statement. I don't know what he was planning on doing there. But there's just so much about Ginjo's past that we never find out about. You know, a big crux of his character is he was the substitute Shinigami, and then he had a fall from grace, and now he's pissed off at the Soul Society. Well, okay, then. Why was he so pissed off? What happened? Can you tell me the series of events that led to that? They are hinted at. Ginjo apparently found out that the Soul Society was tracking him and everything, but was that all there was to it? Was Ginjo just a well-to-do substitute Shinigami? He was just going about doing his duties like always, being very loyal to the Shinigami, and then all of a sudden one day he found out they were tracking his movements with this piece of shit? And then immediately Ginjo's like, fuck them! That just seems a little weird, you know? Ginjo, you know, obviously his temperament, his personality, it's different from Ichigo. Ichigo, the way he took it was that, of course, Ukitake wouldn't tell me, but he's smarter than me, so he could have hidden it. I put my trust in him. I guess Ginjo didn't have the same level of trust that Ichigo did, obviously. But it would make more sense that, you know, Ginjo did something that pissed off the Soul Society. Maybe Ginjo found out that they were tracking him, and then Ginjo did something in rebellion of that, and that was the thing that really got him in trouble. That was the thing, because the Shinigami have been looking for him. They lost track of him. They didn't know where he was. So they were like, alright, we need to find this guy. You know, and they were very worried about Ginjo making contact with Ichigo first and Ginjo messing with Ichigo. They were very concerned about that. So, I don't know. Maybe Ginjo just has some severe trust issues, and just the fact that, what do you mean? What do you mean you've been tracking my movements and you never told me about it? You pieces of shit, I'm out of here. But he still lost his powers along the way. So it's not like he just left of his own accord. He lost his powers somehow. How did he become a substitute Shinigami? That's a big deal. Let me bring this up to speed with you, okay? The only reason, the whole existence of Ginjo was kind of like, and Kubo even explained this, Kubo brought up, how did Rukia know how to give Ichigo her powers? How did Rukia know that that was against the law? How was that even a law to begin with? All of this implies that there was another substitute Shinigami before Ichigo. Okay, well then you bring Ginjo into the mix to fix that problem. And oh, it's Ginjo. Okay, well that's just kind of like an infinite regress problem. Now you have a problem before that. I guess it's not infinite regress because it's just two of them, but that brings up another issue. Okay, if Rukia found out how to transfer the powers because of Ginjo's actions, then how did Ginjo become one? This is the story of the first time that a Shinigami ever sent their powers into a human to become a substitute. This is the first time this has ever occurred. How the fuck? I'd like to know that story, wouldn't you? Was it like, did Ginjo, he was on good terms with the Shinigami. You know, we see that in his backstory with Tsukishima here. He's on kind of good terms with the Shinigami, at least a little bit. He's performing his duties. So it's not like Ginjo, like, you know, stumbled across a dead Soul Reaper and then stole their powers. You know, they were given to him. And the Soul Society had to create whole new laws just for Ginjo. So, like, I'd like to know that, you know, that would imply... If we're going along the same logic here of what happened with Rukia and Ichigo, that would imply that there was a Shinigami that had enough trust and faith in Ginjo to lend their powers to him. And then probably something very similar that happened with Ichigo. You know, he drew in more powers maybe than he was necessary and he became a substitute. But he clearly had his own powers as well, you know? He wasn't like a normal human that had the powers, you know? Because remember, in the Substitute arc, Ichigo was only running off of Rukia's powers, and his own powers were lying dormant inside of him, you know, his own Shinigami powers, because Ichigo's, you know, his father was a Shinigami, so he already had these latent powers. Now, Ginjo didn't have latent Shinigami powers. He was probably running on purely borrowed powers, but he still had strong spiritual energy all of himself, and he still had hollow powers that were given to him by his mother. So even though he's not the exact same thing as Ichigo, we're still mixing in hollow and Shinigami powers into his ability set. So he would still be very similar to the way Ichigo's power were developed, just minus the Quincy shit, essentially. You know, that's what makes, you know, Ginjo a little bit, you know, separate from Ichigo. But aside from that, I'd like to know that story. We get the past with Tsukishima here. That's never really explained. I remember reading that chapter. This showed up at the end of that chapter, and I thought we were going to get a little bit of a flashback arc explaining his, what was the deal there with that shit. But we don't really get it at all. Let's talk about his powers. So his Fullbringer ability is an ability called Cross of Scaffold. So he takes his necklace, his cross necklace, and he converts that into a badass sword. I guess this is a leftover or a remnant of what his sword looked like when he was in when he had his Shinigami powers. Remember when Ichigo went into his final form as his Fullbring, when Ichigo went into his Kamen Rider, you know, Super Sentai outfit, you know? The sword that Ichigo had was like a smaller replica version of his sword he gets when he becomes a Shinigami, so there was some resemblance. So I'm assuming, yeah, his sword when he was a Shinigami was very similar to the one that, you know, takes an appearance here in Cross of Scaffold. It's a pretty cool ability. Basically just shoots massive fuck-off energy shots at anybody that comes at him. You know, he can grab the handle on the inside of the blade and summons up like a giant arrow thing to, you know, like shoot down a giant energy burst at his opponent. After he steals Ichigo's powers, he gets the boost of physical strength as well as gains access to Ichigo's arsenal, which of course consists of just one ability, Getsuga Tensho, but well, I guess maybe two if you count his Bankai, you know, that's also I guess an ability as well. He takes on a very, you know, I can't tell because he absorbs Ichigo's Fullbring, and the appearance that Ginjo takes is very similar to Ichigo's Fullbring, with the white, you know, the white armor surrounding his body, except with a more darker like skull aesthetic. So I can't really tell how much is his Fullbring, how much is taken from Ichigo's Fullbring, and how much is his original Shinigami powers based off of. Can't really tell, you know? But yeah, that's certainly something that's pretty cool there. I just wish, once again, that was shown a little bit maybe in the final arc, if he still had access to his Shinigami powers or something, considering he was in the Soul Society now. He died and went to the Soul Society, so it's a very, very weird trend there with Ginjo, He's a human with hollow powers, then he gets substitute Shinigami powers, then he loses them somehow, and then he steals them back from Ichigo, and then he dies, which I guess mean he loses them, or does he get to keep them because we never really saw him lose them, it was just that he died. So he had to go to the Soul Society, so what? So what? But we don't find out. He, like I said, he shows up in the final arc for like one chapter, gives Ichigo some words of encouragement, why they're helping him out, and then that's it. I just feel like a big missed opportunity here with this guy. I feel like the arc he was introduced in, I feel like some people were hounding on Kubo to get done with this arc as quickly as possible to move on to the last arc of the story, so I feel like there's some rushing there, and then you get to the final arc, which, Kubo wanted to do so much more with the final arc. He had to introduce a whole new villain, a whole new backstory for said villain, which he didn't do that well, and then, a whole new villain set, like the Stern Ridders, a whole new collection of unique enemies. So I'm sure he probably had some stuff in mind for Ginjo, maybe showing a fight with Ginjo in the Fullbringers, maybe some backstory involving the questions that I bring up, how he got his powers, what was the whole deal with him leaving and everything like that. Jeff just never really got to that point there. Now, it's kind of hard not to see also the similarities between the Fullbringer arc and the Chapter Black saga of YuYu Hakusho. That gets brought up a lot. In fact, little fun fact about Tekking. I'll tell you a little fun fact. Right before it was announced that Bleach was ending, this was like in June of last year, I was planning on making a Fullbringer arc discussion, like the whole thing, analyzing the arc, because I felt like a lot of people didn't like it very much, so I just kind of wanted to, open up the hood on this and just kind of look at everything and just take an objective view, like, okay, what's all going on here from the bigger picture. Like, I was in the process of, like, planning that video out, and then, like, 2 weeks later, the big announcement came. Oh, Bleach is ending in 6 weeks, and it's like, well, all right, I guess I'm just gonna have to, I'm gonna have to focus on that. That's what my main attention has to lie on, not so much, that video I was gonna make, but yeah, that was something. So the Chapter Black arc in YuYu Hakusho is probably my favorite arc in the entire manga and the anime. And the similarities between that and the Fullbringer arc are ridiculous. Like, in Chapter Black, you have a character introduced who is the former spirit detective before Yusuke. In the Fullbringer arc, you have Ginjo being introduced as the first substitute Shinigami. You have a character that can manipulate. You have a bunch of humans that are given, some extra powers, as the psychics in there. And then you have, the Fullbringers here. You have a character that can manipulate video games. You had Amanuma in YuYu Hakusho, and you have Yukio here. So, I mean, there's a lot of comparisons here. It really feels like that Kubo took a lot of inspiration from that. And a lot of people accuse him, he's copying it. Well, I would say that a lot of Bleach seems to draw parallels to that a lot of times, like, a normal human becomes a warrior for justice in League that is, being hired by another, extra-dimensional spiritual organization to help them fight evil spirits. Oh, yeah, so, I mean, the plot itself is kind of bare-bones similar to YuYu Hakusho. I'm not too mad about it, because the premise makes sense. I mean, that really is a question that had to be answered about the combat pass. Even going so far back as the Soul Society arc, I remember when Ichigo first got the combat pass, and Uryu looked at it like he was thinking about something, and I was always curious about those little scenes. So Kubo does touch upon those little scenes. He does do that, quite often, in fact. It's just that he'll touch upon them, but he doesn't touch upon them as much as you would want him to do. You know what I mean? Like, he touches upon it, like, oh, yeah, remember back in the Soul Society when Uryu was thinking about that? Oh, yeah, that was because of this. Oh, okay, well, what's the full story behind this? Oh, well, we don't have time for that, but, just the callback, Okay, fine. But anyway, yeah, I like Ginjo, liked his character, like his appearance. I liked, his powers. They seem pretty neat. It's just he didn't really get to go anywhere, and we didn't really find out a lot about his backstory, which I'm sure would have been rather sympathetic if we could see this from Ginjo's perspective. When Ginjo, his last moments before he died, And keep in mind, Ginjo is one of the very few straight up, he's still a human that Ichigo had to straight up kill, So that's pretty there, but his dying thoughts are, what if the situation was reversed, and what if you were in my shoes, and you had to deal with the same stuff that I had to deal with, and I came after you? I think it would be different. But this really does imply that there was a way bigger thing going on here with Ginjo and the Soul Society than just him finding out they were tracking him, or they were limiting you. You can also limit your Ryatsu with this thing, but I don't understand why he would get so pissed off. He probably got pissed off about that, overreacted, and then tried to, fight against the Soul Society. Or he tried to run off with their powers, and they found him, they took his powers away, and then he escaped into exile, and they didn't know where he was. And he spent the next few, maybe a few, not really that long, honestly, because Ginjo's not that old. Maybe a couple years, maybe 5-10 years tops, in plotting revenge against the Soul Society, gathering together all the motley crew that is the Fullbringers, which were basically a bunch of abandoned people, So, and then that was also Ginjo's thing, how Ginjo brought in all these people that were abandoned by society and uniting them together as a family. So perhaps maybe that has something to do with Ginjo, being rejected by the Soul Society, then them kicking him out or something, and him feeling, alone in the world. So maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know. Maybe it had something to do with his childhood. Maybe it had something to do with his parents. I don't fucking know. But anyway, what do you guys think? Comment below, and also comment about maybe some other Bleach stuff you want me to see, you want me to talk about. I got the poster now, so that's the official thing. You have to have a poster in the background that changes no matter what I'm talking about. Okay, we got the Bleach poster now. We're good. Thanks you guys for watching. This will be Tekking101 signing out. Later, guys.